Now we will hear from the author of the book we are launching, Michael Johnston.
Thank you very much, and good evening and good morning, Manila. It's now 6 a.m. in upstate New York on a cold winter morning. We've already had our first snow. I am delighted to be here with you by video. I wish it could be personal contact once again, because as I've listened to the speakers, Mr. Secretary, Mr. CSIP, and all, I'm reminded of just how very much I owe to all of you in the process of putting the report together. The Asian Institute of Management, Angela Garcia, DJ's leadership, TAF Manila, Steve Rood and his staff, several people that I should name there, the Hills Program on Governance at CSIS in Washington, and above all, the interview subjects, the numerous people who made time and shared their wisdom and experience with me, took in a visitor and began the process of filling in the many gaps in my knowledge, and many of those, of course, remain. One of the points I always like to emphasize is that every country has corruption problems. As a matter of fact, the new TI Corruption Perception Index, which has its difficulties to be sure, but is also taken very seriously, actually knocks the U.S. down several notches in its most recent rankings. We have things to worry about here as well. So nobody has all the answers. Corruption does not explain everything that's bad about a society, nor does it negate everything that's good about a country. And I think that's an important lesson to remember. Yet another historical lesson is that many countries have brought corruption under control. It's a long process. It's a process not only of improving governance, but also of building accountability, of bringing people in government closer together. In that connection, the goal, it seems to me now, is, whatever the merits or shortcomings of the book, to have the broadest possible conversations. And indeed, those conversations have been going on in the Philippines well before this project began, will continue well after it's forgotten. One of the things that struck me throughout both my visits and the work is that quite often, the best ideas that I had were already in the process of implementation by various groups, that there are already people out there gathering data and preparing benchmarks. There are already people out there building accountability. That is all to the good, and I think there's just tremendous energy to be linked together. So the conversations that you were sponsoring are really the essence of the process of reform. The Republic of the Philippines has a particularly disruptive and dangerous variety of corruption, I believe, but it also has good people, courageous people. It has the laws, for the most part, on the books that it needs. Every society can improve its legislation, but I don't think the Philippines needs to enact page after page after page of new legislation, but rather to think more in terms of accountability, to think more in terms of popular needs, to engage reform with the cause of poverty reduction, as Mr. CSIP pointed out to me every time that I have talked with him, to build institutions that are capable of bringing people in government closer together. That's a process of nation building, and it's one that every society has to contend with at some point in its history. So the goal of my suggestions fundamentally is to build accountability, to bring people, their needs, government, and those who act in their name closer together. Let me note parenthetically that if I were to talk about New York State's corruption problems, I would be saying very much the same thing. Our problem, our political problem here is a different one. It's a kind of pervasive stalemate, but nonetheless it ends up creating a lack of credibility. It ends up creating rather weak accountability. It's a problem that we need to be worrying about as well. So I think it's important to emphasize that we share many concerns. The The goal, I hope, too, is to create a clearer and more centralized set of responsibilities for anti-corruption functions. And my understanding from what I've read and from people I've talked with is that those changes are already underway in the new administration, and that, I think, is very good news. Indeed, there will be people who will have to make major adjustments as a result of those changes. There will be people who will find the new budgetary realities very difficult, but in the long run, the transition will be worth it. I've also suggested, and this is not a suggestion that is unique to me, that the Sunday Gone Bayan be sped up, that its caseload be streamlined, that cases move through it more expeditiously. That is something that we hope can happen as well. The core of the proposals, the core of the scenario, of course, is the notion of indicators and benchmarks, providing better services, bringing the costs paid by government closer in line with realistic prices, bringing the number of steps and the amount of time involved in procedures down to some more desirable kind of norm, and then showing people that is taking place, through benchmarking, through the feedback that would provide. That is no small kind of proceeding. As a matter of fact, at an OECD conference in Paris about 2 years ago, I made a similar proposal to a number of countries, and these were, for the most part, the wealthy democracies, many of them in Western Europe, and a number of their representatives simply said, no, we're not going to do that. My thought is that within a very few years they will be looking to Manila for very helpful examples, and to the Philippines for ways to move ahead. I think an issue there too is that the indicators and benchmarks will change international perceptions. I've alluded to some of the problems with corruption indices. A number of countries have made major steps in the direction of transparency, only to find that their scores don't change. The needle just doesn't move. Countries that are coping with corruption, countries that have to deal with the fact that corruption scores can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, need to reach out to the world and literally compel their attention. And I think what I'm hearing today about receptivity to the idea of indicators and benchmarks is very good news indeed. And those perceptions can change, those perceptions will change. President Aquino, simply by virtue of who he is and how he ran his campaign, has the world's attention, and that is good as well. So the process we're talking about is long-term. It will involve many reversals. It will revolve around much political contention. That isn't always dignified. It isn't always enlightened. Certainly not in New York State it isn't. But on the other hand, that's the essence of democratic competition and democratic accountability. So I'm very hopeful. I am seeing from a distance, to be sure, a very encouraging atmosphere of new leadership, of new behavior, following Mr. CSIP's example and advice that indeed leading by example, making it clear to people that things can change and have changed, is the way to encourage change down through the structure and out in society as well. The Philippine people have a leadership committed to their well-being. They have tremendous energies, tremendous social resources. The time is right, and I think there will be better days ahead. Thank you very much.